How does a clan that ruled for 800 years vanish in a single afternoon? And how does a rusted blade, silent for 2 centuries, suddenly choose to speak? I am Luna, and tonight I am going to tell you a story that lives in the cracked margins of 7 different martial chronicles, a story that the official histories of the 7 kingdoms tried very hard to forget, because the truth of it makes too many powerful families uncomfortable even now. It is the story of a young man named Yorik Embermere. It is the story of an old sword that should have stayed silent. And it is the story of what happens when a single human being, beaten down to the absolute floor of their existence, refuses to take the last step into the dark. Picture this: the autumn of the 312th year of the Crimson Calendar. The Jade Spire Pagoda, 9 tiers of carved white stone rising out of the morning mist of the Cloudfang Mountains. 47 clan banners snapping in the cold wind. The annual Convocation. The day when the great martial houses of the Eastern continent gather to renew alliances, resolve disputes, and confirm the standing of every clan still considered worthy of recognition. Yorik Embermere walked up those 9 tiers alone. He was 24 years old. He wore a robe that had once been the deep red of his clan, but was now faded to the color of dried mud. He carried no retinue. He carried no gifts. He carried only a sword on his back, wrapped in plain cloth, because the family that had once owned an arsenal could no longer afford a proper scabbard. His hair was tied back with a strip of leather. His boots had been resoled 4 times, and in his eyes, if you looked closely, there was the particular quiet of a man who has already lost almost everything and has come to find out exactly how much is left. He had come because tradition demanded it. The Embermere clan, however reduced, was still a clan. And the head of every clan, no matter how diminished, was required to stand before the Convocation once a year and answer the same 3 questions. Do you uphold the codes? Do you honor your dead? Do you continue? For 200 years, an Embermere had walked up those steps. For 200 years, an Embermere had said yes. Yorik intended to say yes one more time. He did not know that Elder Han Wuxin had spent the last 6 months purchasing every debt the Embermere clan still owed. He did not know that Master Liang Po had bribed 3 of the Convocation's witness elders. He did not know that Lady Mei Shulan, whose family had been allies of Embermere for 6 generations, had agreed 3 weeks ago to vote with the others. Yorik did not know any of these things because Yorik was 24 years old and he had been raised by an honest father, and he believed that men who smiled at him at funerals were men who would smile at him in the daylight too. He reached the top tier. The 7 pillar elders were seated in their crescent of carved chairs. The other clan heads stood in their assigned positions. The young disciples lined the outer ring, watching with the polite hunger of people who suspect that something interesting is about to happen and do not want to miss it. The mist was lifting. The sun was just beginning to touch the top of the pagoda. Yorik knelt on the cold stone. He pressed his forehead to the floor in the formal greeting of a clan head before his peers. He waited. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Then Elder Han Wuxin rose from his chair. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with a gray beard combed into 2 precise points and rings on every finger. He had a beautiful voice. When he was younger, he had been a singer of war ballads before he became a politician of clans. He used that voice now. He said, "Yorik Embermere, the Convocation has reviewed the standing of your house." He paused for effect, the way a man who has rehearsed a speech in his bath pauses for effect. He continued, "The Embermere clan, once a pillar of the Eastern continent, has for the past 200 years sustained itself on borrowed dignity and inherited debt. Your estate is in ruins. Your treasury is empty. Your disciples number 3, all of them elderly. Your master, your father, died last winter without naming a successor of recognized rank. You yourself, while bearing the blood, have produced no technique, no notable victory, no public service to the Convocation in any meaningful capacity." Yorik kept his forehead pressed to the floor. This was traditional. This was how a clan head listened to a formal review. Han Wuxin continued, "The Embermere name has become a shadow. The Convocation, after long deliberation, has determined that the dignity of the assembled clans is no longer served by maintaining the fiction of Embermere's standing. Therefore, by formal vote of the 7 Pillar Elders, ratified by 29 of the 47 assembled houses, the Embermere clan is hereby declared extinguished. Its territory reverts to the Convocation stewardship and will be redistributed. Its banners are to be lowered. Its name is to be removed from the rolls. There was a pause. Yorik did not move. Han Wuxin lowered his voice into something almost kind. He said, "Stand, young man. It is not a punishment, it is a mercy. A name that has become a burden is no longer a name. Stand and walk down these steps and live whatever life you can make for yourself. The Convocation will not pursue you. The Convocation only requires that you no longer claim to be what you are not." Yorik did stand. He stood slowly. He did not raise his eyes immediately. When he did raise them, he looked first at Lady Mei Shulan, because the Mei and the Embermere had been allies for 6 generations, and his father had carried her uncle out of the burning pass on his shoulders 30 years ago, and her grandmother had stood at his mother's bedside the night Yorik was born. Lady Mei looked away. It was a small motion, a turn of the head, maybe a hand brought up to adjust her hair, but Yorik saw it, and he understood it completely. He understood that the vote was not a surprise to her. He understood that she had known. He understood that the only person in this entire pagoda who had not known what was about to happen was him. He took a slow breath. He said in a voice that was younger than he wanted it to be, "May I speak?" Han Wuxin smiled, the smile of a man being generous. He said, "You may." Yorik said, "My father served the Convocation for 41 years. He fought at Iron Hollow. He fought at the 3 Bridges. He carried the wounded of the Liang clan, of the Han clan, of the Mei clan off 3 different battlefields. When the famine of the year 298 took the eastern provinces, my father sold the last of our jade reserve to buy grain for villages that did not even bear our banner. When my mother died in childbirth with my younger sister, my father did not request the customary year of withdrawal because the Convocation had asked him to mediate the border dispute with the Vale clan. He gave his year. He gave many years." He paused. His voice was steadier now. He said, "You are not extinguishing a name. You are extinguishing a man's life of service, and a woman's quiet faith, and a sister I never met, and the bones of every Embermere who served you. I would like that to be acknowledged, even if the vote stands." There was a silence. Some of the younger disciples around the outer ring shifted on their feet. Han Wuxin said, "Acknowledged." He did not mean it. Yorik could hear that he did not mean it. Then Master Liang Pa stood up. Liang Pa was a smaller man, narrow, with a clean-shaven face and the kind of eyes that always seemed to be calculating the price of the room. He said, "There is one further matter. The Embermere Ancestral Hall contains items of historical value, which, under standard extinction protocol, revert to Convocation inventory. We will dispatch a recovery party within the week. The young man will provide access." Yorik turned his head slowly. He said, "There is nothing of value in the hall." Liang Pa said, "There are items of historical interest. The Convocation will decide what is of value." Yorik said, "The hall contains my father's grave. It contains my mother's name carved in the western pillar. It contains the ashes of my grandfather. It contains a sword that has hung above the founder's portrait for 200 years, which no Embermere has been able to draw since the death of Master Casimir Embermere himself. There is nothing else. The hall is a place of bones. Send your party and you will find bones." Liang Pa smiled. He said, "Then the bones will be transferred to a public ossuary. The land has been sold. The buyers wish to begin construction in spring." It was at this point that Yorik understood the full shape of what had been done. The vote was not about the standing of his clan. The vote was about the land. The Embermere estate sat at the convergence of 3 trade roads. It had sat there for 800 years. The land was worth something to someone, and that someone had paid Han Wuxin enough to make the vote happen, and Han Wuxin had paid Liang Pa enough to second it, and Lady Mei had been told something that made her unwilling to stand against it. And the bones of his family were going to be moved into a public hole in the ground so that someone could build a granary on top of his mother's name. He felt something at the base of his throat that was not a sound exactly. It was the absence of a sound. It was the place where a sound would have been if he had still been the kind of young man who believed that words mattered in rooms like this. He bowed. He bowed because he had been raised by a father who said that a man's last gesture in a hostile room should be a gesture his ancestors would not be ashamed of. He said, "I understand." He turned to walk down the 9 tiers. That was when the disciples of the Liang clan stepped into his path. There were 4 of them, young, well-fed, well-dressed, the kind of disciples who learn martial forms in heated training halls with padded floors. The lead one, a thick-shouldered young man with a flat face, smiled the same smile his master had smiled. He said, "Master Liang has asked us to remind the no longer Embermere that the steps of the Jade Spire are reserved for clan heads. You may take the servant's path down the rear of the pagoda." The servant's path. The narrow, unlit, broken stone path that wound around the back of the pagoda. The path that brought you out next to the latrines. The path that nobody who carried a banner had ever been required to use. Yorik said quietly, "I will use the front steps." The thick-shouldered young man said, "You will use the back, and the master would like the sword you carry to be left here, as a gesture of cooperation." Yorik did not move. The young man stepped forward. He reached for the cloth-wrapped sword on Yorik's back. What happened next, every disciple on the outer ring remembered differently for the rest of their lives. Some said Yorik struck first. Some said the Liang disciple struck first. Some said it was a brawl. Some said it was a beating. What is documented in the Convocation record, in the carefully neutral language of the recording elder, is that there was a brief altercation, and that the young Embermere was subdued, and that the sword on his back was confiscated, examined, found to be a rusted and worthless artifact of no martial value, and returned to him on the floor where he lay. The reality was simpler. 4 young men beat a 5th young man in front of 200 witnesses. They beat him until his nose was broken. They beat him until one of his back teeth came loose. They beat him until his ribs on his left side made a sound he had never heard a part of his own body make. And then they took the sword off his back, unwrapped it in front of the gathered clans, held up a rusted, pitted blade that looked like nothing so much as a piece of farm scrap, and the assembled clans laughed. They laughed. That is the moment. That is the moment I want you to hold on to. Because if you have ever in your life stood in a room where people you knew, people you had broken bread with, people whose children you had carried on your shoulders, laughed at you while you bled on the floor, then you already know this story. You already know what Yorik felt. You already know the exact temperature of that laughter. You already know how it sits. So let us go back. Let us go back to the bottom of the Jade Spire steps, where Yorik Embermere finally stood up. His left eye was swelling shut. His mouth tasted of iron and broken enamel. The rusted sword had been thrown onto the stones beside him like a piece of refuse, and the laughter of 200 clan members was still ringing off the white walls of the pagoda behind him. He bent down. He picked up the sword. He wrapped it again in the dirty cloth. He did not look back. He walked, not down the servant's path that Liang Pa's disciples had ordered him to use, and not down the main steps that the Convocation had now forbidden him. He walked off the side. He climbed over the low stone balustrade of the 3rd tier, dropped to the gravel garden below, crossed it slowly because his ribs would not let him move faster, and stepped through the side gate that the gardeners used. The gardeners watched him go. One of them, an old man with a rake, lowered his head as Yorik passed. It was the only bow Yorik received that day. He walked north. He walked north because north was the Cloudfang Mountains, and the Cloudfang Mountains were the only place in the 7 kingdoms where a man with no name could disappear without anyone asking him to produce one. He walked for 4 days. He did not eat for the first 2. On the 3rd day, he chewed pine bark because his father had told him once that pine bark could keep a man alive if he did not mind the taste of his own teeth bleeding. On the 4th day, he reached the cliff above the Vale River, 2,000 feet of granite dropping into white water, and he stopped walking. He sat down at the edge. This is the part of the story that the official chronicles do not record, because the official chronicles only record what witnesses can confirm, and Yorik Embermere had no witnesses on that cliff, except the wind and a sword that the world had agreed was worthless. But I am going to tell you what happened, because what happened on that cliff is the entire reason this story exists. He took the sword out of the cloth. He laid it across his knees. He looked at it. He looked at the rust eating its way down the spine of the blade, at the cracked grip where the leather binding had rotted through, at the chip in the edge that no Embermere had been able to polish out for 200 years because no Embermere had been able to draw the sword from its scabbard in the first place. The sword had hung above the founder's portrait in the ancestral hall, and the legends said that Master Casimir Embermere himself had sealed it the night before he died, and that it would only open again for the heir who needed it the most. For 200 years, no Embermere had needed it enough. Yorik wrapped his hand around the grip. He pulled. The sword did not move. He pulled harder. The cracked leather of the grip tore against his palm, and his palm bled. The sword did not move. He laughed once, a short, ugly sound, and he said out loud, to the empty cliff, of course, "Of course you do not open for me. I am the one who lost everything. I am the one who let them burn the banner. I am the one who let them take the bones. Why would you open for me?" He set the sword down on the granite beside him. He looked at the river. He thought about his father. He thought about his father's hands, which had been enormous, with thick, calloused knuckles, and which had taught Yorik to tie his first sword knot when Yorik was 6. He thought about his mother, whom he had never met, who had died giving birth to a sister who had also not survived the night. He thought about the way his father used to stand on the western veranda of the ancestral hall on the first morning of every winter, hands behind his back, looking out at the snow, never saying anything, just standing there as if he were keeping a promise to someone who was no longer in the room. Yorik understood now what that promise had been. The promise had been, "I will not let this die while I am alive." His father had kept that promise. His father had kept it for 41 years until his heart gave out one winter morning on that same veranda. He had kept it badly in some ways. He had kept it without money. He had kept it without allies. He had kept it without producing a son who could draw the ancestral sword, but he had kept it. Every morning of his life, he had stood up and kept it. Yorik thought, "My father kept his promise, and I am about to break mine on this rock." He picked the sword up again, not to draw it, just to hold it. He held it across his knees the way his father used to hold it on ceremony days, with both hands resting flat on the scabbard, and he looked out over the river and he said out loud to no one, "I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to keep going. There is no clan. There are no allies. The land is gone. The bones are going to be moved. I am 24 years old and there is nothing left, and I do not know how to do this." He waited. The wind moved through the pines below the cliff. The river kept going where rivers go. And then, this is the part of the story that the witnesses cannot confirm. This is the part that you may believe or not believe, depending on what kind of person you are, and depending on whether you have ever, in your own life, sat on your own cliff with your own version of this question and felt something answer you that you cannot quite explain afterward. The sword across his knees grew warm. Not hot, warm. The way a stone grows warm when you have been holding it in your hand for a long time. The warmth started in the grip and moved down the blade through the scabbard, and it spread across Yorik's thighs through the cloth of his robe, and it stayed. And then he heard a voice. The voice did not come from the air around him. The voice came from inside his own head, but it was not his own voice. It was the voice of an old man. A deep voice, slightly hoarse, with the cadence of a man who has not spoken in a very long time and is rediscovering the shape of words. The voice said, "You are not the one I expected, but you are the one who came." Yorik did not move. He did not breathe. He thought very carefully, "Am I dying? Have I already stepped off the cliff and I do not realize it yet?" The voice said, "You are not dying. You are listening." 200 years is a long time to wait. I had begun to think no one in our line would ever be desperate enough to actually hear me. It turns out desperate is the only condition under which a man hears anything true. Yorik looked down at the sword. The rust was still there. The cracked grip was still there. The chip in the edge was still there. Nothing about the sword had visibly changed. And yet the sword was warm, and a voice was speaking inside his skull, and the warmth was real, and the voice was real, and the cliff was real, and Yorik Embermere, who that morning had been the last living member of a dying clan, found himself doing the only thing left to do. He listened. The voice said, "My name is Casimir Embermere. I founded this clan 800 years ago. I sealed this blade 200 years ago when I understood that our line was going to fall, and that no amount of teaching or warning would save it, because clans do not fall from outside attack. Clans fall from inside forgetting. So I did not leave my heirs a fortress, because fortresses can be taken. I did not leave them an army, because armies can be bought. I left them me. I left them every technique I ever learned, every battle I ever fought, every mistake I ever made, sealed inside this blade, waiting for the heir who had lost so completely that he had nothing left to lose by listening." Yorik whispered, "Why now? Why me?" The voice said, "Because you are the first Embermere in 8 generations who has stopped pretending. Every one of your fathers before you tried to hold the clan together with the appearance of strength. They borrowed money to maintain estates they could not afford. They attended convocations to pretend they still had standing. They smiled at men who were already planning to take what was left. They preserved the form of the clan and let the substance die. You are the first one in 200 years who has been stripped down to nothing. No banner, no estate, no allies, no audience, no pretense. You are the first one who has nothing left to protect except the actual truth of who we are. And the actual truth of who we are can finally be taught to you, because there is nothing in the way of it anymore." Yorik closed his eyes. He felt something in his chest that was not quite tears, because his body was too dehydrated to make tears properly, but it was the feeling that would have been tears in a body that still had the water for them. He said, "I do not know any techniques. I cannot draw the sword. My father could not draw the sword. His father could not draw the sword. I am not a master. I am a beaten man on a rock." The voice said, "Good. That is the correct starting point. Every master I ever taught who began as anything other than a beaten man on a rock became a worse master because of it. Stand up." Yorik stood up. The voice said, "Look at the sword." Yorik looked at the sword. The voice said, "The sword does not open with strength. The sword opens with the willingness to be seen exactly as you are, by yourself, without flinching. You cannot draw the blade if you are still telling yourself a story about who you are. You can only draw the blade if you are willing to be the thing you actually became today on the steps of the Jade Spire. Are you willing?" Yorik thought about it. He thought about it for a long time. The wind kept moving through the pines. The sun moved a fraction of an inch across the sky. He said, out loud, "I was beaten. I was laughed at. I let them take my father's bones. I am ashamed. I am afraid. I do not know if I can do this. I am the man on this rock. That is the whole of who I am right now." The voice said, "Good. Now draw." Yorik wrapped his hand around the grip. He did not pull hard. He pulled the way the voice had told him to pull, which was not really pulling at all, which was more like asking the sword to come with him into whatever was about to happen next. The blade came free. The rust did not fall away in a flash of light, the way the stories about magical swords always say it does. The rust stayed. The chip stayed. The cracked leather stayed. The sword that Yorik Embermere drew from its scabbard on the cliff above the Vale River was the same battered, ugly, 200-year-old piece of pitted steel that the Liang clan disciples had laughed at on the pagoda steps 4 days earlier. It looked like nothing. It looked like a farm tool, but it was open, and it was his. And inside the steel, the voice of Master Casimir Embermere said, "Welcome home, grandson. We have a great deal of work to do, and we do not have very much time." That was the first morning of 5 years. 5 years. 5 winters in the Cloudfang Mountains. 5 summers of dawn to dusk training in a clearing nobody knew existed, taught by a voice that nobody else could hear, with a sword that nobody else respected. 5 years during which the 7 kingdoms forgot the name Embermere completely, because the 7 kingdoms have been told to forget it, and because the 7 kingdoms are very good at forgetting names that powerful people wish them to forget. But the man on the cliff did not forget, and the sword did not forget. And on the morning of the 5th anniversary of the day they made him walk down the back path of the Jade Spire Pagoda, a stranger in a plain traveling robe walked into the border tournament at Hollowstone Pass. He did not give his clan name. He registered as a wandering swordsman. He paid the entry fee with 3 copper coins. The tournament officials laughed at the rusted sword on his back, and one of them suggested he buy a proper weapon before he stepped into the ring. The stranger smiled. He said, "This one will do." By the end of the afternoon, 3 of the most highly ranked young disciples on the eastern continent were lying on the dirt of the tournament ring, unable to stand, looking up at a man whose name they did not know, with a sword that looked like it had been pulled out of a barn. And the whisper began. The whisper that would, within 6 months, reach every clan compound on the eastern continent. The whisper that would, within a year, reach the ears of Han Wuxin and Liang Po and Lady Mei Shulan, sitting in their elegant halls, drinking their fragrant teas, surrounded by all the proofs of their carefully accumulated power. The whisper was a single question, and the question was this: who is this man with the ugly sword? Stay with me, because I have not even told you yet about the night Yorik stood at the gate of the Jade Spire Pagoda again, 5 years older, alone, carrying the same rusted blade, while every banner in the courtyard turned slowly toward him in a wind that nobody could quite explain. I have not told you yet about the orphan girl in the ruined village of 3 Bridges, who would become the first disciple of the restored Embermere school. I have not told you about the spy from House Han, who lived among them for 2 years, and what Yorik did when he finally found out. I have not told you about the night Lady Mei Shulan opened her door and found him standing there, with no weapon drawn, with no anger in his face, only a single question that she had been afraid to hear for 5 years. I am Luna. Stay with me, because we are about to walk, together, through every single one of those mornings.